do you think, in any way, not saying any specific government, but do you think the provincial government has any role to play in regulating the internet to prevent radicalization, or do you think these kind of oversights will just marginalize groups even further?
I do think that what needs to be done, I do think that there is room for it. We were trying to come up with a bill that would stop the provincial government from advertising on platforms that have hate, right? So, but I think there's two problems. One is that is that we have what you call reliable information, right? The stuff that's produced, it's vetted. An actual person who at a newspaper, for example, that reporter has a name, they have a job. If that newspaper gets sued, specific people will be held to account, right? So publishers, they're all wary. They put more effort into fact checking, right? Because they are all real people and they're accountable. It's like, to me, what has caused the crisis with Facebook and social media, it is partly greed, it is partly algorithms, but what it is fundamentally is that Facebook is not accountable for anything it puts online, and neither is YouTube, and neither is Google. And that is a specific law in the Millennium Copyright Act that says it actually makes Facebook possible. It says that Facebook and Google and YouTube are not responsible for what is on their platform. That's somebody else's business. You can post whatever you want, and then someone complains and they'll take it down later. Well, that's not good enough, because for two reasons. One is the question that nobody in Silicon Valley ever seems to ask is, how can this be turned into a weapon? How can this be weaponized? So what's happened is that Facebook, YouTube, and Google, and they are absolutely massive, and they are people, when they think about hate online and radicalization, there are small groups, but like the YouTube comments, YouTube groups, the people are being radicalized by content on the biggest companies in the world. It's not just little ones. So one of the things that there has to be accountability is to say, look, Facebook and Google, if you publish this stuff, you're actually going to be held to account. But the other is that you shouldn't be allowing people who are completely anonymous to hide behind these things. So, because the two things about it is you have anonymous groups, and people think of them as being free floating. Well, you've got this group of white supremacists here, you've got this group of fundamentalist radicals here. These groups get money, but they're also in politics, and it's not a new thing in politics. You get AstroTurf groups or third parties, where political parties, especially in the US, have a long tradition of setting up phony groups that are where they have a plausible deniability, or running phony candidates, paying people from other parties. Like Kanye West right now running for president is not a new thing. Is that Roger Stone and Donald Trump together used to, on going back 40 more years and more, would get African American candidates to run in contests in order to split the vote for the left. It's not a new thing. And the same thing happens with these sort of third-party organizations, which are really actually working for or with another party. In the US, it's particularly bad because there's unbelievable amounts of money flowing into it. But similar things happen in Canada as well. So you've got, and part of it is, but it's a weird offshoot of, with political parties, we're not allowed to take money from unions or corporations in Canada anymore. So you're only allowed to take money from individuals, which in principle is a great idea. The hard part about it is that we haven't replaced it. So political parties have lost lots of funding. It's harder for them to do their work, and governments won't fund them with public money, even though I think they should. So what happens is that both corporations and unions pour money into third-party groups, which then act to support one party or another, or multiple parties, and occasionally you'll also have complete rogue groups, and that's what happened in the 2016 U.S. election. It's happened in Canada as well, where you have people being paid to suppress the vote. People are, they're running ads and running messages that, because they can't be tied to a political party, that the political party can wash their hands and say, well, we didn't say that terrible thing, right? And instead you have but it makes things much more divisive and much more poisonous, because there are no rules governing. There's no ref, so you have no rules governing what normally would happen. And I'd say the one other thing about social media is just how it's just the entire idea of privacy has almost completely disappeared. So any part of your past personal life is considered fair game. And in ways that it would never once have been that would never have been acceptable, and it's extremely destructive. So my attitude, I don't know that or I've been trying to figure out how to get out of it, and I think part of it is to when I first was elected, and when I first started my campaigns, I would tell my team, we need to try to be a bit more forgiving, and that's like, I actually think that it's one of the most underrated things you could talk about. But the idea that what I see as the division is escalating punishment, right? So you say, well, this side does this, and it's just this the division and the polarization is a result of people hurting each other more and more and escalating more and more and more. So how do you de-escalate and how do you unwind that? And part of that is to say, well, there are other ways of making these things better than punishing people, or hurting people, or calling for someone's head. That there should be room to allow someone to apologize and make amends, right? And that's another way of making things better, rather than just saying, well, how are we going to punish them as harshly as possible? But that's where we're going, right? With both the left and the right, it's become, or it's very punitive and very harsh, and people stop caring about each other. So the only way out ultimately that's how peace treaties work, right? You actually need to be able to talk to people, recognize people as a human being, and there I haven't figured it out entirely, but that idea of forgiveness is a way of healing the divisions and the fighting that's happened.